Oh boy, here we go. I've said before in my KIF video that I was a big cartoon guy as a kid, but I never really expanded on what network I was most fond of. Growing up in the 2010s with stuff like Adventure Time and Steven Universe, it was kind of a no-brainer that I would become a CN kid. And I was a loud, booger-picking ne'er-do-well, exactly the stereotype the studio would call its demographic as. Of course, that didn't stop me from checking out the other two channels. If Gumball wasn't airing, I would flip through Nick and Disney just to kill time. Sure enough, Disney themselves had bangers like Gravity Falls and Phineas and Ferb, but when you asked me to name good shows from 2010's Nickelodeon, I would have had a hard time trying to think of something. That is, until a little show from 2016 caught my eye. This was unprecedented because I've never had a show on Nickelodeon from the 2010s I would actually sit down and lock in for. I wasn't the biggest fan of CGI shows, and we all know how I feel about Sanjay and Craig. The Loud House was a fresh new 2D show and with a style that's reminiscent of comic books, and I was all for it. But then No Such Luck aired and the creator was outed as a sex pest, so I think there's some reason why I eventually stopped watching.
He's fucking strangling her for the costume.
I feel like the Loud House fandom is already infamous enough without me explaining what they usually do. Heck, even back when I first started watching, the intro itself ending with I knew there were some freaks that would go to town there. And the crazy part is, I consumed it. Wait.
I can explain.
I'm just gonna let it be known that I was like 13 at the time, and in that age you tend to explore a bunch of things, especially when you have unrestricted internet access.
There's so much
But what happened was, my urge to go on spicy websites became stronger.
And at the time, I didn't really care, but after a literal decade, rest assured my thoughts on pro shipping is wildly different than how I viewed it back then. With that said, I can't really deny reading these Loud House stories, and I was legitimately goon-brained, so I knew from when an episode dropped, someone was gonna make a comic out of it based on the plot. Yes, we're talking about Loud Says, I'm sorry. Memories. And it's the usual bullshit you'd expect, but there's one story in particular I want to talk about because of how different it felt, how devoid of the usual Loud House conventions I used to see, and how it legitimately inspired a remake of the story separate to the actual Loud House franchise itself. If you haven't clicked out of the video yet, here's your warning. See, and how devoid of the usual Loud House conventions I used to see, and how— Why the fuck did I say that? The Secret is an NSFW comic series based on The Loud House made by Sketch-Toons. It features Luna, the third oldest sister, having a relationship with Lincoln, the one boy from 10 girls. For the sake of this video, not dying, I'm gonna be roundabout with some terms, replacing them with stuff like bonding, so bear with me. Some of you loud heads think this is a familiar title, probably because a YouTuber already talked about it.
Aha, Lincoln, you are banging your sister.
CAMG, is that how you pronounce it? I don't know. I'm just gonna call him CAMG. CAMG already went into detail with this story, so I won't be going that deep into it, but I still would like to talk about it regardless. The story starts with Luna already taking advantage of her brother. Like, what the fuck, already? And it's clear that this is an abusive relationship that Lincoln wants out, as his rejection of her causes her to hit him in a fit of rage. As Luna deals with the fallout from earlier, she gets visions of the second older sister, Leni, fueling her body dysmorphia. There's a bipolar nature to Luna's presentation as she tries to comfort Lincoln, and while I don't have the image saved, she threatens him to come to her room late at night just before she leaves. But right before she comes back to her room, she sees a picture of the family with Leni drawing blood from her lip through sheer anger and drawing over it, as she says it's all her fault. Luna will make things as it used to be, and she won't let anyone get between her and her brother. Let me tell you, when I first read this, I did not expect to come out of it being intrigued rather than being the other thing. Come for the core and stay for the plot is a popular line to say when it comes to things that give you an actual compelling story rather than focusing on getting your rocks off. And there's a lot of comments like that on this series. 13-year-old Kino felt unnerved, and it's only now that I get to break down why that is. Man, I'm recording this right now and I keep hearing myself, the fuck do you mean I'm doing an analyzing evil Luna Loud Sketch-Toons video? When you start the story, it's understood that the title is a reference to this relationship that Luna and Lincoln have. But as we move forward, that idea was just a red herring, and I didn't expect for the events of the real Secret to be foreshadowed this early. The author tries to mimic the style of the original show, and it's off-putting seeing this yandere personality come out layered through this cartoony, comic-y lens. Whether it be through a lack of skill or a full on artistic decisions, Sketch decided to keep things black and white, replacing the black with purple as a reference to Luna's color scheme. It makes the sets taken from the show feel very spacious or cramped depending on the intention. It's from the show, but there's clearly something wrong. This lack of color adds impact, especially when it's broken through Luna's eyes of derangement or through blood.
The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in center frame. He too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not LARPing Loud Says here, but the story was enough for me to become engaged and go and immediately read Chapter 2. Chapter 2 continues the story but completely dropping the purple and white style and going for a full color look. We get a glimpse of how Luna's insecurities started here and what ultimately led her to becoming a yandere. Luna in the actual show is a chill, laid-back rock star who's probably a lesbian. She reps Pink Floyd, not Sigmund Freud, so it was a good call to actually explain how she became this way. If Lincoln wasn't my brother, Lord, you know I'd try to bow. Actually, wait, this comic has to do overtime to explain Luna being this out of character, but in her backstory, she was already portrayed as someone who has self-esteem issues, which the character from the show does not have. So the backstory failed anyway. The style is closer to the show, and on one hand, it's great because of the accuracy, but on the other, you get these scenes that are supposed to be taken seriously, but they look like this. Luna once had a boyfriend who was only using her to get to Leni, and it's implied that she was publicly humiliated for this fact, with Luna being a key factor in this ordeal. As Luna goes to check on Lincoln, we see Lori, the eldest of the family, and Leni checking on Lincoln already because he said he's feeling sick. Luna freaks out about the idea that the two older sisters would suggest that they would take care of Lincoln instead of her, and Lori shuts her up for being weird.
When I first met you, I thought you were weird and annoying. And you are.
And man, while I was really into the story, it was a bit hard, not because of the subject matter, but because it's clear English wasn't the author's first language. I'm okay with a bit of bad grammar. I watched Jack's films after all, but then Lori is just characterized by spamming the word literally, like, okay.
That genuinely seagull.
In the dead of night, after this conflict, Lincoln decides to sneak out until Luna catches him and decides to, bond with him, to put it lightly. This line is fucked up because you can immediately tell what her plan was. But in the middle of her act, Luan opens the door and is shocked at what's going on, ending chapter 2. You guys see why I was so engrossed? It's weird. I know it's weird and it's a feeling I'd never felt before reading something like this. I've dabbled in comics like these before, but through the Japanese variety, and Metamorphosis is one of those, haha, funny, you thought it was regular corn, but it's just torture corn. Where's my art anime Reddit gold? And yes, there's something to be said about these types of stories and apparel being easily accessible to teenagers, but just like with Metamorphosis, I was hooked in morbid curiosity. Then a few months went by, nothing happened, so I fell out of reading NSFW comics. Actually, wait, that wording was fucked. This was not the only reason I stopped reading stuff. It's mainly because I did this thing called growing up and discovering alcohol.
What's that?
This was the reason why I never really learned that there was a chapter 3 until CAMG's video. And for my research, I had to read it, and okay, it opens with an injured Luan on the floor. This chapter was mainly a backstory and the whole thing with her and Luna. Luna has been getting mean girls breathing down her neck, telling her about how her boyfriend at the time was just with her for the sake of getting closer to Leni. After angrily breaking things off with the guy, she's met with a confession letter that asked her to go behind the school, eventually realizing she got pranked by the mean girls with help from Luan. Though Luan was coerced by the bullies into pranking someone without the knowledge of who that person was, the chapter ends with us coming back to Luna, seemingly pulling an Amori on her sister, with Leni coming in to see, ending the story on another cliffhanger. Sketch-Toons, you did this already. You don't need to blue ball us again. What, chapter 4 is gonna end with Lori pogging at Leni.exe next time?
That genuinely seagull.
This was the story so far. Sketch-Toons teased the chapter 4 in 2022, but we can see that it never came into fruition. And just like with CAMG, I did my research and I cannot for the life of me find any reason as to why they ended it. Personally, I think Sketch-Toons thought an incest essay-focused comic series about the Loud House was more trouble than it's worth, or that he just got bored of it. Where's chapter 4, Sketch? I need it! At its core, there's something compelling here, and that would be the end of it, except it's bogged down by gratuitous bonding scenes, nudity of questionably aged characters, and the fact that it's fucking Loud House, completely stopping it from being a straight-to-the-point story that realistically portrays familial abuse. Also the grammar, but you could comfortably critique it even without that.
That genuinely seagull.
That was the original Secret comic, and I could have ended it here, but on January of 2018, 2 years before the release of chapter 3, an artist by the name of SwainArtFS released his version version of the secret, and oh boy, we're done with the context. Let's get into it. I first encountered Swain back when he was making this When Gravity Falls comic where Wendy may or may not be a Bill Cipher skinwalker, so I immediately had a tether after learning about him doing his own version of the secret. Swain kept his setup tight, completely removing the Loud House in the equation, and since 1 boy, 10 girls was a little unrealistic, he opted for a simple angle of 2 sisters and their little brother. Fucking ripping Lori and Luan off like a symbiote. Leni, Luna, and Lincoln were renamed to Charlotte, Neek, and Tristram respectively. Just like the first chapter of Sketch's version, the artist kept in black and white, but Swain keeps that style all throughout his 5-chapter run. It seems like I wasn't the only one that felt inspired by that artistic choice to keep the red as the only color. Every masterpiece has its cheap copy. Swain to me is a pretty interesting artist, all things considered. According to chapter 1's description on his DeviantArt, this was supposed to be a one-off for the purpose of de-rusting, but when he saw discussions around it grew big, he decided to draft the rest of the story all in one go. He also gave this draft to Sketch-Toons for his blessing, and Sketch-Toons himself even asked if he could borrow Swain's ideas over on his version. Sketch's chapter 2 was apparently finished around May of 2019. It's unclear when Swain showed his draft to Sketch, but I would assume chapter 2 is when both stories started converging in terms of plot. This is probably the reason why chapter 2 for both versions are so similar, despite Swain saying in his description that from this point forward, it would be his original story. This is like when Star vs. the Force of Evil started borrowing popular fanships to continue the story. Tom Star was already perfect mid-series, guys, but I guess the crew really like Between Friends. Swain's version is, I think, the better version. Not only because it's actually finished, but because it doesn't have the same criticisms I gave for the original. And I'm not gonna say Swain's version is perfect, but it's definitely a lot easier to digest without the ghost of Lincoln Loud. Me talking about which incest essay story is better. This is your last warning in terms of spoilers because I truly think Swain did something good here, and it would be foolish of me to say that my video should be your first and only experience of his art. If you're open to insanely fucked up stories and can tolerate triggers, go to his DeviantArt and read his secret for yourself. With that said, aside from the quality of the story itself, there's a bunch more artistic decisions in Swain's version that I quite enjoyed. The presence of double page spreads adds variety to the reading experience. Swain has his own art style which gives the intended effect in regards to serious scenes, so there's no worry of divine irony. Neek's layered, deteriorating mental state being presented using these faint, almost invisible lines literally under her text box dialogue. While it is graphic, the censorship is tasteful and the abuse is portrayed carefully, as opposed to the first page being Neek giving her brother some. There's a scene in the first chapter I find to be much more impactful than the original. As Neek forces herself upon her brother, the viewers do not see the act happen, at least not in full view. This parallels Tristram himself as he's disassociating, focusing on whatever else is in his room, or what's beyond it. It's quiet despite Neek's screams of twisted pleasure. It's depressing despite the white space portraying a bright sky. It's emotional as we see the lack thereof from the abuse. It's very heavy, and it should be that heavy. In chapter 2, Tristram calls his friend Laverne, who I can only imagine is Clyde's counterpart from the show, describing the abuse he went through. And in a realistic fashion, Laverne treats it as a good thing. To score with a girl, no matter the circumstances, is to be cool, and that's heartbreaking for Tristram. What the fuck, Clyde? And even without those artistic liberties, I find Swain to be a lot more engaging, as he's quite open with his process. He would do these commentaries under every page upload, and I find them interesting, from him ranting about his weakest panels to him nudging the readers to what things to look out for. In a deleted thread from 4chan, a story time was being done for Swain's The Secret. He popped in, giving extra bits and pieces about the project that I find very endearing as a creative. Yes, I am still talking about Loud Says. This was also where he mentioned Sketch asking for permission to borrow his ideas. Chapter 1 follows closely to Sketch's version, as I've said before. The red herring in Sketch's secret is only through the acts, but Swain deliberately added dialogue that implied that the act was the secret. That is until we go into chapter 2. I never mentioned anything about what was in the pills in Sketch's version because the label is just skull. What is this, rat poison? But Swain specifically showed that it was Rohypnol, further adding to my theory as to what Luna's intentions were at the time. There's a subtlety to Swain's presentation, especially with regards to the backstory. The bullies were more passive and Neek didn't even interact with them. She just overheard them about her boyfriend's wrongdoings. Unlike the boyfriend in Sketch's version, he never punched back against Neek, and the backstories flip back and forth with present day as Neek waits for the Rohypnol to kick in. And just as chapter 3 is about to end, we get the same cliffhanger, but to a much stronger degree. Charlotte will now be part of this story moving forward, treading new ground from what we saw in Sketch-Toons version, and I am afraid.
Get to it. I can't. take this shit no more, man.
As Charlotte realizes what's going on, she shoves Neek away, checking in on Tristram. Neek's jealousy causes her to spill her gross secret, flaunting what she thinks is a win against her more desired sister. Neek then taunts Charlotte with descriptions of her acts, forcing Charlotte to fight and take Tristram downstairs. But before she could, Neek gets up and pushes her sister down the stairs, mirroring the events that took place in Sketch-Toons' Chapter 3. In that scuffle, Neek suffers a torn earlobe and a dilated left pupil, while Charlotte is placed on a wheelchair, leaving her to the whims of her sister, just like Tristram. This was a pretty graphic chapter, not only due to Neek's description of her acts with the abuse, but also we get to see each part that Charlotte broke as she tumbled down. Her nails not strong enough to stop the fall, her wrist sprained, her leg broken. It's haunting, especially with the ending. I felt pretty pissed off the first time I read this, and that was ultimately the point, but can we just kill her, like, right now? Chapter 5 starts us off on a time skip with Charlotte attending therapy. She's depressed, as you would expect, as she maneuvers away from truthfully speaking with her doctor. Neek, as her primary caretaker, taunts her with descriptions she can't walk away from, taunts her with the sounds of her acts that she can't do anything about. It's harrowing. In this moment of defeat, Charlotte's doctor tells her that if she has trouble being brave for her own sake, it's better to be brave for someone else's, and I thought that was pretty profound. And I think that says so much about her character, especially once we learn what the real secret was, what Tristram actually did. It was never explained why Neek had Rohypnol back when it was first introduced, but at the start of Chapter 3, it was implied to be Charlotte's medication. Neek disgustingly mentions how you could sleep through anything as long as you took those, while Tristram begs her to not say anything. Readers have been speculating about this being the hospital scene from Evangelion, but it's so much worse. The page follows is Charlotte contemplating whether or not she should just leave Neek and Tristram alone. Is Tristram's abuse brought on by him being also an abuser at one point? The paneling here is really good, and I don't have to tell you that, you could just see for yourself. And then Charlotte reaches an ultimatum, forgiving both Tristram and Neek for what they've done, wanting to get both of them the help that they need. For the longest time, Neek has held this secret over Tristram as she feels that her brother was as deranged and as dirty as her, like pigs, as she put it. But when Charlotte, choosing compassion, she breaks, pinning Charlotte to the ground until she sees a girl in front of her having the same facial features. The pages so far have been shown the default DeviantArt customization of the viewer with nothing in frame aside from the page. But with this, Swain gives us a background from beyond the page of this unknown girl. This activates a light bulb in Neek's head, completely stopping her attack on Charlotte, and said that she would go to therapy. Just like that. Charlotte and Tristram are clearly baffled by this change of attitude. Then we fast forward to Neek talking about how she saw a future at that moment and knew that no matter what happened, she would win. As for what future she saw, in her own words, that'll stay as her little secret. Okay, I already did that. Man, what the fuck? The plot twist at the end had me agape for a solid minute, and it came right after Charlotte's conviction being as hopeful and as caring as it gets. It's such a sucker punch, it had my right eye dilating. This was an incredibly interesting story, and it's one that you can kind of see as realistic down to Tristram's actions, as real life is not always that black and white. There's nuance to toxic familial relationships and the taboo that could eventually come from that. Sorry if this video is a little more heavy than usual. I just wanted to talk about this story, and considering the subject matter, I think some restraint was necessary to discuss it. When I first read Swain's story, it was through an Imgur gallery containing all of the chapters. Whether it be through Swain's official upload or through a fan, I would never know, due to Internet Archive redirecting me to the site whenever I plug in Swain's links, but the album had these prologues in between chapters. Due to Charlotte being away for 1/3 of the series, I thought that these excerpts serve to give more depth to her, as I remember her being the focus of some of these, talking about how she felt weird after waking up while on her medication. While I can't 100% verify, I am confident that these were taken from the storytime thread mentioned before. There's an extra layer of characterization there that I enjoyed, and speaking of layers, I deliberately haven't talked about the secrets that Swain himself has put in the story. The series can stand on its own legs without it, but the unknown girl has been appearing in one way or another, whether through apparitions only seen by the viewer or through a break in character in the commentary description. Swain has mentioned that it's open to interpretation, and that includes completely omitting the supernatural aspect in favor of the more realistic, bipolar nature of, you know, our main character. Some theories relate to the unknown girl being from the future and manipulate the lives of our characters in order for her to be born, driving Neek and Tristram to this twisted idea of love. And this is another layer to experience Swain's The Secret. So, yeah, overall, great messed up comic. And I highly think you should check it out even after you've watched the entire video, I would assume. Sorry. Unlike CAMG though, this will be the first and only time I talk about Loudses. Bye-bye. On the next episode, we will be talking about the witch with no name.
This is my sister.
This is my brother.
We are siblings and we care for each other. Everything we own,
We always share
because we are siblings and we have the same hair.
That genuinely tickles